For 45 years, Carver Lake held its breath, concealing a rusted sedan beneath its murky waters. When finally revealed, it offered not the tragic closure a grieving father expected, but an even colder, more baffling mystery. The car was empty. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments where and what time it is you're tuning in from. It means everything to know we're telling these stories together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. The morning sun of a late summer Saturday in 1980 streamed through the kitchen window of the small rental house, illuminating the dance of dust motes in the air and casting a warm glow on the Jones family. The air smelled of percolating coffee, sizzling bacon, and the faint, sweet scent of the honeysuckle vine that climbed the porch railing. It was a scene of simple, hard-won domestic peace, the kind Samuel Sam Jones cherished more than anything. At 28, his life's rhythm was defined by the steady work of his hands that were calloused and often stained with the day's grease from the auto garage, but which were unfailingly gentle when they touched his wife or son. Brenda Jones, 2 years his junior, moved through the small kitchen with a vibrant energy that seemed to make the very space expand. She was the dreamer to his pragmatist, the one who filled their home with books from the library where she worked part-time and music from the radio that was always playing. While Sam worked to build their foundation, Brenda adorned it with color and life. She flipped a pancake with a practiced flick of her wrist, her laughter bright as she dodged a hug from their son, Andre. At 7 years old, Andre was a perfect fusion of his parents. He had Sam's quiet, observant nature, able to sit for long stretches on the floor, utterly absorbed in the intricate workings of his collection of die-cast cars. But he possessed Brenda's vivid imagination, creating sprawling narratives of cross-country races and daring rescues for his miniature fleet. This morning, he was a barely contained whirlwind of excitement, his destination being the home of his aunt, Brenda's sister, in the next town over. "Is Aunt Carol making her peach cobbler?" Andre asked, his mouth full of pancake, his eyes wide with anticipation. Tightly clutched in his left hand, as it almost always was his most prized possession, a small, die-cast coupe, its red paint chipped from countless imaginary crashes. "I'm sure she will if you ask nicely enough," Brenda said, ruffling his hair. She glanced at Sam, who was lacing up his heavy work boots by the back door. "You sure you can't come with us, baby? A double shift on a Saturday seems like cruel and unusual punishment." Sam sighed, the weight of the long hours already settling on his shoulders. "I know, Brent, but Mr. Henderson is giving me all the overtime I can handle, and every extra dollar gets us closer to that house with the big oak tree out back." He looked at Andre, his expression softening. "Big enough for a real tire swing, little man. Just like we talked about." The dream of that house was the fuel that kept Sam going. A place they owned, with a yard Andre could run in without worry, and a garage Sam could finally call his own. It was a tangible future, and he was building it one grueling shift at a time. This double shift was the reason he wouldn't be in the family's sturdy sedan beside Brenda. A fact of life, a small sacrifice for a greater goal that, in the years to come, would twist into the central, agonizing question of his existence. After breakfast, the familiar routine of departure began. Brenda packed a small bag with snacks and a few of Andre's comic books for the drive. Andre, after a brief, serious search, located his red coupe, which he'd momentarily left on the windowsill, and secured it in his pocket. Sam walked them out to the car, a practical, seafoam green sedan that he kept in immaculate running condition. "Now, you be good for your mom. You hear?" Sam said, leaning down to hug his son. Andre wrapped his small arms around his father's neck, the smell of soap and coffee a familiar comfort. "I will, Daddy. I'll bring you back some cobbler." "You better," Sam smiled, his heart swelling with a fierce, protective love. He turned to Brenda, who was leaning against the driver's side door, watching them. He stepped close, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "You drive safe, okay? Call me at the garage when you get there." "Always do," she said, her voice soft. She leaned in and kissed him, a deep, lingering kiss that tasted of coffee and the quiet promise of their shared life. "We'll be back a little after dinner. Don't work too hard." "I'll try," he lied, knowing full well he would. He watched as Brenda slid into the driver's seat and Andre scrambled into the back, immediately setting up a small racetrack on the vinyl seat with his little red car. Sam stepped back onto the curb, raising a hand in farewell as the sedan pulled away, its engine a familiar, comforting rumble. He watched until the car turned the corner at the end of their street, a final flash of green in the bright morning sun. Before he finally turned and began the walk towards the garage, his mind already shifting to carburetors and oil changes, his heart settled by the simple, unwavering certainty that he would see them again in just a few short hours. It was the last simple, certain thought he would have for the next 45 years. The seafoam green sedan hummed along State Highway 14, a ribbon of asphalt stretching through rolling hills and dense forests of Georgia pine. Inside, the car was its own small, happy world. Brenda Jones drove with a relaxed confidence, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other tapping along to the upbeat rhythm of an earth, wind, and fire song playing on the radio. The windows were down just enough to let in the warm, pine-scented air without creating a roar, a compromise she'd made with her son in the back seat. Andre, for his part, was completely absorbed. The backseat of the car had been transformed into a miniature interstate system. His prized red coupe was currently embroiled in a high-speed chase, its silent engine screaming as he narrated the action in a series of dramatic whispers and sound effects. "He's making a break for it," Andre muttered, maneuvering the toy car over the vinyl seat's rolling terrain. "No way he gets away, not from me." Brenda glanced at him in the rearview mirror, a fond smile touching her lips. "Who are you chasing down today, sweetie?" "The bad guy," Andre answered with the simple, unwavering conviction of a 7-year-old. "He stole the diamonds." "Well, you make sure he doesn't get away with it," she said, turning her attention back to the road. The drive was a familiar one, a route she had taken dozens of times to her sister's house. It was a journey marked by familiar landmarks, the old clapboard church with a tilted steeple, the sprawling pasture where a herd of black and white cows always grazed, and, marking the halfway point, the long, concrete expanse of the Carver Lake Bridge. The bridge was a product of a more ambitious era, a two-lane crossing that spanned the deepest part of the man-made reservoir. On either side, low concrete guardrails, stained with time and weather, offered a meager sense of security against the dark, murky water below. As the sedan rumbled onto the bridge's surface, the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires crossing the expansion joints was the only change in the journey's steady cadence. Andre, momentarily distracted from his chase, pressed his face against the window, looking down at the vast, placid surface of the lake, its depths hiding a world of tangled tree roots and sunken history. It was in this ordinary moment, suspended between two shores, that the world tore itself from its axis. The omniscient narrator, a silent observer, could see what no one else on that lonely stretch of highway could. There was no other car in sight, no deer darting from the woods. Yet something happened. A sudden, violent swerve. The squeal of tires protesting against the asphalt was sharp and desperate, a sound that ripped through the peaceful afternoon. The sedan veered hard, its front bumper connecting with the low concrete guardrail with a sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass. For a breathtaking instant, the car seemed to hang there, balanced on the precipice between the solid world and the deep, silent one below. Then, gravity, patient and unforgiving, reclaimed it. The back end of the car lifted, and the vehicle tipped over the edge, plunging nose first into the dark green water of Carver Lake. The splash was immense, but brief, a violent eruption that quickly subsided. A cascade of bubbles broke the surface, then fewer, then none at all. The heavy sedan, a tomb of green steel, began its slow, silent descent, slipping beneath the surface and into the cold, silted depths where it would remain, undisturbed and unseen, for the next 45 years. The surface of the lake settled, its placid face once again reflecting the indifferent blue sky, holding its terrible secret in perfect, unbroken silence. Miles away, at Henderson's garage, the passage of time was marked by the clang of wrenches and the hiss of pneumatic tools. Sam Jones, his face and arms smeared with grease, wrestled with the stubborn transmission of a Ford pickup truck. His body ached from the long hours of his double shift, but his mind was on the future. Each tightened bolt, each solved mechanical puzzle, was a small step towards the house with the oak tree, towards the life he was building for Brenda and Andre. He thought of them at his sister-in-law's house. Andre likely full of peach cobbler, Brenda catching up on family gossip. He smiled to himself, imagining their return that evening, the stories Andre would tell of his day. When his shift finally ended late that night, the exhaustion was a heavy cloak on his shoulders. He walked home under a sky full of stars, the familiar route feeling longer than usual. He turned the key in the lock of his front door, pushing it open and expecting the soft glow of the living room lamp, the low murmur of the television. Instead, he was met with a profound, unnerving silence and darkness. "Brenda," he called out, his voice sounding too loud in the stillness. "Andre, we home?" No answer. He flicked on the light switch. The house was exactly as they had left it that morning. The breakfast dishes were still in the drying rack. A small, forgotten toy car, not the favorite red one, lay on its side on the living room rug. A knot of unease tightened in his stomach. They were late, that was all. Maybe they decided to stay for a late dinner. He checked the clock. It was nearly 11 p.m. He made himself a cup of coffee, his fatigue warring with the growing anxiety. An hour passed, then another. Finally, with a trembling hand, he picked up the phone and dialed Brenda's sister. Her voice on the other end was sleepy, then confused, then filled with a shared, rising panic. "What do you mean, are they home?" she asked, her voice sharp with sudden fear. "Sam, they never got here." The fluorescent lights of the county sheriff's office hummed with an indifferent buzz, a stark contrast to the frantic, chaotic storm raging inside Samuel Jones. It had been 12 hours since that soul-crushing phone call with Brenda's sister. 12 hours of frantic calls to other relatives, to hospitals, to state troopers, each call deepening the terrifying certainty that his family hadn't just been delayed. They had vanished. Now, standing before the front desk, his work clothes still smelling faintly of motor oil and his eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night of terror, he felt a new kind of chill, the cold front of institutional apathy. He was eventually led to the small, cluttered office of the lead detective assigned to the case, a man named Henderson in his late 40s with a permanently weary expression and a gaze that seemed to file people away before they'd even finished speaking. Sam, his voice hoarse, recounted the day's events, the anniversary dinner they'd had to postpone, his double shift, the planned trip to Brenda's sister, Andre's excitement, the little red toy car. Detective Henderson listened with a practiced stillness, making only a few perfunctory notes on a legal pad. When Sam finished, the detective leaned back in his squeaking chair, steepling his fingers. "Mr. Jones," he began, his tone dripping with a condescending world weariness. "I've been doing this a long time. A woman, a kid, car's gone. You'd be surprised how often this story plays out. You two have any trouble recently? Financial stress? A little argument you're not telling me about?" The insinuation was immediate and infuriating. "No," Sam said, his voice trembling with a mix of grief and anger. "Nothing like that. Brenda, she would never do that. She would never, ever leave Andre. They all say that," Henderson said with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if Sam's passionate defense of his wife was a predictable part of a tedious script. "She have her own money? Friends I should know about?" The questions continued in this vein, a subtle interrogation of Brenda's character and their life together, built on the ugly, unspoken assumption that this was just another domestic issue within their community. Sam's raw anguish was treated not as the plea of a terrified husband and father, but as the naive denial of a man who didn't truly know his own wife. The official search, when it began, reflected this underlying attitude. It was a procedural affair, conducted with a noticeable lack of urgency. Patrol cars drove the route Brenda would have taken, officers asking cursory questions at gas stations and diners. When Sam, remembering conversations about the bridge, insisted they check Carver Lake. He was met with size and budget concerns. Still, protocol demanded they make an effort. A small dive team was assembled a few days later. They spent less than a full day at the site. The lake was deep, the water a murky, impenetrable brown. The technology of 1980 offered little help. There was no advanced side-scan sonar. Only the courage of two divers swimming slow, concentric circles in near-total darkness, their powerful lights cutting pathetic beams into the void. They searched the areas closest to the bridge's support pylons, the most likely spots for a car to have settled if it went over. After just a few hours, the dive commander, citing the prohibitive costs, the dangerous conditions, and the complete lack of any physical evidence on the bridge itself, no broken railings, no skid marks, officially called off the search. If they were in there, we'd have seen something, he told a devastated Sam on the shore. We can't search the whole damn lake. They're not in there. That conclusion was all the validation Detective Henderson needed. With the lake theory officially dismissed and no other clues, the department formally defaulted to the runaway scenario. In their final report, it was noted that Brenda Jones had left her home with her son and was believed to have departed the area voluntarily. The active investigation was closed. The case number was filed away. It was cleaner that way, a tidy, if tragic, explanation that required no further allocation of resources, no difficult questions, no real work. For Sam, the world buckled. He was left entirely alone, adrift in a sea of nightmarish possibilities. His family was gone, and the very people meant to help him had treated their disappearance as an inconvenience, their lives as disposable, their story not worth the effort of uncovering. He was left with not only the searing pain of his loss, but the profound, burning injustice of a system that had refused to truly see him, to hear him, to help him. The silence that followed was no longer just the absence of his wife and son. It was the resounding silence of a door being deliberately, officially, and permanently closed. Time, for most of the world, is a river, flowing ever forward, carving new paths and smoothing old sorrows. But for Samuel Jones, time became a frozen lake, its surface still and vast, preserving the single, catastrophic moment of 1980 in perfect, agonizing detail. The first year after Brenda and Andre vanished was a blur of raw, disbelieving pain. The second was a storm of rage, at the universe, at the faceless perpetrators he couldn't name, and most corrosively, at the indifferent shrug of a justice system that had filed his family away under voluntarily departed. After that, the rage cooled into something harder and heavier, a lifelong, solitary vigil. Sam never left the small house that should have been a temporary stop on the way to their dream. The down payment he had been saving became an untouchable, sacred fund, its purpose lost, but its meaning immense. He kept Andre's room as a perfect time capsule of 1980. The posters of Star Wars and the Atlanta Falcons yellowed on the walls. The small fleet of toy cars remained parked in their precise, 7-year-old arrangement on the dresser. He dusted them weekly, his large, mechanic's hands moving with a reverence that was heartbreaking to witness. The little red coupe, the one Andre had taken on that final trip, was the only one missing from the collection. The town and the world grew and changed around him. The 1980s brought new music, new fashions, a new political climate. Henderson's garage, where he worked, eventually got a computerized diagnostic machine that baffled him at first. The 1990s brought the internet into people's homes, a web of global connection that felt like a cruel joke to a man whose own small web of 3 had been so irrevocably torn. He watched the rise of shows about unsolved mysteries and true crime, their dramatic reenactments a pale imitation of his own quiet, daily reality. He saw stories of missing children. Often, he noted with a familiar, bitter ache, white children ignite national firestorms of media coverage with dedicated hotlines and expert analysis. For Brenda and Andre, there had only been a few fleeting articles in the local paper and a handful of flimsy, sun-bleached flyers. His advocacy for them never truly stopped, though its form changed with the decades. In the beginning, it was loud, demanding meetings with Detective Henderson, who soon retired, then his successor, who offered sympathy but no action. By the 1990s, it had become a quieter persistence. Once a year, he would call the cold case line a new invention and dutifully give his name and the case number he knew by heart. He'd ask if any new technologies could help, if any new leads had ever come in. The answer was always a polite, regretful no. The file, they would tell him, remained inactive. He became a local legend, a piece of the town's folklore. Newcomers would be told his story in hushed tones. That's Sam Jones. His wife and son disappeared 40 years ago now. Just vanished. He was treated with a mixture of pity and a strange sort of reverence. He was a living monument to loss. But what they couldn't see was the stubborn, flickering ember of hope he kept shielded within him. It was this hope that drove him, every year on that awful August anniversary, to the side of the Carver Lake Bridge. He would stand there for an hour, looking out over the water that the police had so quickly dismissed, and place a small, handmade wreath of wildflowers on the guardrail. It was a silent conversation, a promise to Brenda and Andre that he had not forgotten. He was still here. He was still waiting. He watched generations of law enforcement cycle through the county sheriff's office. Young deputies who had listened to his story with fresh ears in the late 80s became grizzled, weary sergeants by the 2010s, telling him the same thing his first detective had, albeit with more sympathy. Without new evidence, there was nothing they could do. By 2024, Sam was 72. His body stooped from a lifetime of leaning over engines and carrying a grief that had no physical form but immense weight. His dark hair was now a crown of white, his face a roadmap of his quiet sorrow. He had seen the world transition from payphones to pocket-sized supercomputers that could access all the information in the world, all except the information he craved. The internet now had forums dedicated to cold cases, and a new generation of online sleuths occasionally stumbled upon the thin digital trail of his son and wife's disappearance. They'd spin theories for a few days: abduction, a secret new life, a crime connected to some other forgotten event, before the tide of new content washed them onto the next mystery. For Sam, it was all just noise. His reality was the silence in his two-bedroom house, the empty space at his dinner table, the unchanging childhood artifacts in his son's room. Hope, after 44 years, had weathered into something different. It was no longer an expectation of a joyful reunion, but a desperate, final prayer for a single, simple thing: an answer. An end to the not knowing. He had made his peace with the likelihood that he would go to his own grave without that answer. The last guardian of a story with no final chapter. He had no way of knowing that deep beneath the placid surface of Carver Lake, a historic drought was beginning to do what 4 decades of police work never had. It was starting to reveal a secret. The spring of 2025 arrived in rural Georgia, not with gentle rains and blooming dogwoods, but on the parched breath of a relentless, historic drought. For months, the sun had blazed from a mercilessly clear sky. In Carver Lake, the vast man-made reservoir that had silently held its secrets for nearly half a century began to shrink. Its once generous shoreline receded dramatically, exposing vast, cracked mudflats and the skeletal remains of trees long submerged. The water level dropped lower than any living soul in the county could recall, lower even than the pessimistic projections of the Regional Water Authority. It was this unyielding thirst of the earth that would finally force the lake to give up one of its oldest, darkest secrets. On a bright, cloudless morning in late April, a young surveyor named Ben Carter was conducting aerial drone assessments of the receding waterline for the county. His drone, a sophisticated quadcopter equipped with a high-resolution camera, hummed over the newly exposed western expanse of the lakebed, an area far from the bridge, a section that had always been deep water, tangled with submerged forest remnants, and never considered in the brief, inadequate search of 1980. As Ben reviewed the live feed on his controller, a peculiar glint of reflected sunlight from a regular, metallic shape half buried in the glistening mud caught his eye. It was too uniform, too out of place amidst the natural debris. He maneuvered the drone lower, the camera zooming in. The shape resolved itself into the distinct, undeniably man-made curve of a vehicle's roofline, almost entirely encased in decades of hardened silt and aquatic growth. The call to the sheriff's department was logged with professional curiosity, but without immediate alarm. Objects were often found when reservoirs were low. But when a deputy arrived and, after a difficult trek across the treacherous mudflats, confirmed it was indeed a car, and an old one at that, a different kind of attention began to gather. The vehicle was almost entirely submerged in the compacted earth, only its roof and the top of its window frames visible, like the exposed spine of some prehistoric creature. The county's resources were stretched, but the potential significance of a car entombed for so long, in a lake that held its share of local lore about missing persons, prompted action. A heavy-duty recovery crane, typically used for forestry work, was laboriously maneuvered to the edge of the solidified mudflats a day later. The operation was slow, fraught with the risk of the ancient vehicle disintegrating. Thick straps were carefully worked beneath what they hoped was a solid chassis, the crane's engine groaning in protest as it began to pull. For Samuel Jones, now 73, the morning had begun like any other in his quiet, solitary life. He was tending the small vegetable patch in his backyard, his movements slow but deliberate, when the unfamiliar county sheriff's car pulled up to his modest home. He recognized the young deputy, Miller, who sometimes stopped by just to check on him. But today, Miller wasn't alone. With him was a woman Sam didn't know, her expression serious and kind. Detective Alicia Hayes, from the newly re-energized State Cold Case Unit. The words, when they came, were delivered with a gentle caution that couldn't soften their earth-shattering impact. Mr. Jones, Detective Hayes began, her voice soft. We think we may have found a car in Carver Lake. An old car. We believe it might be Brenda's. Sam felt the world tilt. 45 years. 45 years of waiting, of hoping, of despairing, of replaying that last Saturday morning in his mind until its edges were worn smooth with grief. He gripped the handle of his hoe, the wood familiar and grounding beneath his trembling fingers. He could only nod, his throat too tight for words. The journey to the lake was a blur. He sat in the passenger seat of Detective Hayes' car, the landscape outside a meaningless procession of trees and fields. His mind was a maelstrom of images, Brenda's laughter, Andre's small hand clutching his red toy car, the seafoam green of their sedan. He felt a terrifying surge of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in decades. A sharp, agonizing hope, so potent it was almost indistinguishable from fear. When they arrived, the scene was one of controlled chaos. The crane stood like a sentinel, its task complete. And there, resting on a large tarpaulin spread over the muddy ground, was a shapeless mass of rusted metal, caked in layers of dark, wet earth and trailing weeds. It was barely recognizable as a car, let alone his car. Yet, as a forensic technician carefully scraped away mud from a corroded piece of metal at the rear, Sam saw it. A fragment of seafoam green paint, then a misshapen but still legible digit from the license plate. His breath caught in his chest. It was Brenda's car. After 45 years lost to the silent depths, it had returned. Detective Hayes placed a supportive hand on his arm. "Mr. Jones," she said, her voice full of a compassion that still couldn't bridge the chasm of his grief. "We need to try and open it. We need to see what's inside." Sam could only nod again, his gaze fixed on that mangled, rusted resurrection from the lake. Every fiber of his being, every moment of his last 45 years, was focused on that car, on the rusted doors that held the answer to a lifetime of waiting. The air was thick with unspoken questions, with the suffocating weight of time, and the unbearable tension of a secret about to be finally, irrevocably, revealed. The air around the recovered sedan hung thick with the smell of disturbed lakebed, rusted metal, and 45 years of submerged secrets. Samuel Jones stood a respectful distance away, leaning heavily on a cane Detective Hayes had quietly provided, his gaze fixed on the grotesque, mud-caked shell that had once been his family's car. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drummer counting down to a revelation he both craved and dreaded. Every breath was a struggle against the suffocating weight of anticipation. The forensic team, clad in white Tyvek suits, moved with methodical care. The car doors, warped and fused by decades of corrosion and immense pressure, resisted their initial attempts. A crowbar was employed, then a specialized hydraulic tool. Each metallic groan and screech from the tormented vehicle seemed to echo the anguish in Sam's own chest. Finally, with a jarring shriek of tortured metal, the driver's side door was wrenched open. A wave of foul, stagnant air, smelling of decay and trapped time, washed over them. Detective Hayes and her team peered inside, powerful flashlights cutting through the gloom. Sam took an involuntary step forward, his old eyes straining. The interior was a ruin, packed almost solid with dark, oozing silt and lake detritus. The vinyl seats were shredded, the dashboard a barely recognizable landscape of corrosion. Carefully, painstakingly, the team began to clear away the debris. They worked in near silence, the only sounds their own hushed movements and the squelch of mud being scooped into evidence buckets. Sam watched, his hope and dread warring within him, each passing minute an eternity. It was Detective Hayes who spoke first, her voice low and carefully neutral, yet unable to completely mask the surprise. "Mr. Jones, there are no human remains visible at this time." The words seemed to hang in the air, incomprehensible. Sam frowned, leaning closer, as if by sheer force of will he could make their forms appear. What do you mean?" "The car, sir," Hayes continued gently, turning to face him directly, her eyes full of a compassion that barely touched the surface of his sudden, reeling shock. "It appears to be empty. We'll continue to excavate and sift everything, but Brenda and Andre are not in here." The world, which had tilted on its axis when he was told the car was found, now seemed to spin completely out of control. Empty? After 45 years at the bottom of a lake, the car was empty? The one certainty he had clung to for nearly half a century, that his wife and son lay entombed within that vehicle, was ripped away, leaving a void far colder and more terrifying than the murky waters of Carver Lake. He stumbled back, a choked sob escaping him. A young officer quickly offered him a chair. The team continued their grim work, their discovery now tinged with an even deeper layer of bewilderment. They'd find things. From the silt-filled passenger footwell, a forensic technician carefully extracted a small, heavily corroded metal object. As she gently brushed away the layers of mud, a flash of dulled red paint became visible. It was Andre's favorite die-cast toy car. Sam let out a sound that was a pure, raw expression of pain. Later, from what remained of the glove compartment, they retrieved Brenda's purse, its leather rotted and its contents a sodden, indistinguishable mass, save for a few miraculously preserved, laminated cards. Her library card, a faded photograph of a smiling Sam. These small, intimate remnants of their lives, found in this watery tomb without them, were almost unbearable. The discovery of the empty car threw the reopened investigation into uncharted territory. The central question no longer revolved around a tragic accident or even a straightforward act of foul play that ended at the lake's edge. Now, it was a labyrinth of far more disturbing possibilities. Why was the car in the lake if Brenda and Andre weren't? Was it a deliberate decoy, meant to make authorities believe they had perished in an accident? If so, what truly happened to them? Were they taken from the car before it was submerged? Or did they somehow, impossibly, escape this sinking vehicle only to meet another fate? The car itself was transported to a secure forensic facility. Preliminary examination showed no obvious signs of a pre-impact collision with another vehicle, no bullet holes, nothing to immediately suggest how it left the road. But the fact that it was found in a remote part of the lake, far from the bridge, suggested it hadn't simply careened off the highway by accident. It had been deliberately driven or allowed to roll into that secluded, deep-water grave. Why? For Samuel Jones, the discovery was a cruel paradox. He had received a piece of his past, a tangible link to that last terrible day, but it had only deepened the chasm of the unknown. The faint, almost resigned hope that he might finally lay his wife and son to rest, that he might finally have a grave to visit, was gone. Instead, he was confronted with a mystery more profound, more unsettling than he could have ever imagined. As the sun began to set, casting long, somber shadows over the recovery site, Sam stood alone, looking out at the now darkening waters of Carver Lake. 45 years he had waited. The car had come back, but Brenda and Andre had not. They were still out there, somewhere in the vast, echoing silence of the missing. The case of the Jones family, once cold, was now burning with a fresh, agonizing series of unanswerable questions. The search, he knew with a weary certainty that settled into his very bones, was far from over. It had, in a way, just begun again.